Welcome to KVEC. My name's Denny May, and we joined by Brenda Combs, and many of our staff members are also on with us today. Welcome again. This is IEP, developing the IEP, and we just want to talk in general terms today about some of the things that go in the IEP. The IEP is a living, breathing document. It should be a document that you recognize as a legal contract that you enter into with the student and the parent, and that we are so serious about that we make sure that we're implementing and that we're taking data and we're progress monitoring and doing all those things. But we'll get into it. We'll talk about it. So, without a whole lot of talk about where we're headed and what we're doing, but we always like to talk about, what do we hope to get out of this? So we're going to take a close-up look at some of the screen saves from the IEP guidance document, the screen captures. We're also going to look at what are the purposes, what are the overall things that we hope to gain from the IEP. And the IEP is the individual education program. Sometimes we confuse that with the word plan, and it is a plan too, but the official name is program, individual education program. And so we're going to look at some, we have quite a bit of experience on here today in terms of reviewing files. And we'll talk about some of the common pitfalls that we see in IEP documentation across the region to kind of give you an idea of what, just kind of take a look at and say, oh, I better really pay attention here, because these are some of even our veteran teachers are making mistakes on at times, and we're failing to, or we're glossing over in the writing of the IEP. Let me say this is a big job. Being a special education teacher is an important job, and it's a very, very big job. And so just wanted to take a second before we go on. And of course, we'll review present levels and measurable goals and a little bit of specially designed instruction at the end. But, what you do as a teacher is very, very important. And what you do for students with IEPs is, layered on top of what they get as a regular ed student first. And so I just want to set that bar, because I want us all to be on the same page, and hopefully, not going to get real philosophical here, but hopefully we're all on the same page that our students can learn, and they can learn at high levels, and our students need to be included with their peers as much as possible. And we need to be doing things with them that are going to make a difference and close gaps and help them with transition, help them to function, and then also help them to behave. And so those are some of the things that we'll be talking about. Brenda's going to talk to you here a little bit about the overall purposes of the IEP. And when we listen to Teresa Combs speak, lots of times she's real good about telling us, what does this all mean, from a legal standpoint, but also what should we be doing for kids, and that's, so Brenda, go ahead and talk to them a little bit about the guidance document and what the purpose of the IEP is.
Okay, so the guidance document has been revised once again to help us to be our guide. And sometimes you hear us say something like it's our IEP Bible or something like that. So it is a very important document. And within that document, it has a lot of information. One thing about that document that I like, it has a lot of guiding questions. So if you have a question about something, what do I need to put in this place or whatever you're working on, there's those guiding questions that will help you. It will help you, write your present level statements all the way through till we're doing the yes, why. So it has everything in there that you need to know. So you need to have a copy of that and have it handy every time that you write your IEPs. That way you will have that. And once you go through that about 5 or 6 times, you will know it. So you won't have to flip through it so many times. It is a very good document, and you need to get yourself aware of everything that is in that document. Now, the multi-purpose, there's so many purposes of the IEP. But, as we have here, we have the 3 big rocks, and one of them is the progress. We have to make sure that we are the students are making progress. They have to be able to do their goals, and at 90% accuracy is what we look at as a mastered a goal. I know we see a lot of 80%, and to be glad, some of our kids to see 20%. It just depends on the student, so it's individualized. So we don't have to have 80% all the time for things, okay? So we want to make you aware of that, because 90% is really the top percentage that the student has mastered that goal that you write in the IEP. So the progress, we're looking through the objectives that you write, the objectives. You look at that, and then you do your progress monitoring, however you say, but the more we progress monitor, the better we're going to see the child, how well the child is doing on that goal that you're doing that. But we're always measuring the goal, okay? Because the regs say that we measure the goal, but we had those objectives to help us to do that. So we want to make sure those students are making adequate progress as much as they can. So access, we need to make sure that those kids have access. That is like the civil rights part of it. So we need to make sure that they have access to the curriculum. And most of the time you will see that in their regular education classrooms. And then sometimes we have to pull them to our resource rooms to help them with those pieces and give them more supports as they need it. Now, transition, there's so many different things about transition. We transition from preschool to kindergarten, then we'll do, the middle school and to the high school. So we're doing a whole lot of transition pieces just to make sure that they are getting the proper direction. We want to make sure they understand those pieces of all those three things. And within your IEP, you have all those pieces are listed there. So we want to make sure that all those three pieces are done and done correctly.
So, Brenda, just having a little conversation here, when we listen to Teresa Combs speak about this, she says there shouldn't be anything on the IEP that doesn't bring about progress or access. Amen. And then we put transition out there because it's a little special thing on its own. But if we went back up to progress, we could also say progress academically, progress from a functional standpoint, how you get along with people, how your social competence, and then we could also say behavior. And then when students with IEPs also have protection of 504 law, and so we're supposed to give them access. So I'll give you an example of access. What we're talking about here, we may have a student that, let's say, maybe in the 9th grade, 10th grade, whatever, and that student may be reading at a much lesser level. Now, do we give up on that student, teaching them everything we can teach them about how to read? No, we continue to work on that goal. That goal would still be relevant for an academic goal, but then the access piece would be, what are we weaving in the supplementary aids and services to provide access to the grade level materials, the access to the programs, the access, and then it's also talking about not just that, but access to the extracurricular activities, access to the bus, to the field trips, to the career transition fairs, and whatever is going on for a student without a disability, that we would make sure that we find a way to provide as much access as possible. And if you talk then about students with significant disabilities, we want to make sure that we can communicate with those students so that they can have access to the programs and they can have access to the education that we're supposed to be giving them, providing them. So there's lots of things to think about there, but it just struck me when I went to the training not too long ago with Teresa Combs, who is the foremost legal guru in special education in the state and has been for years. She says, don't have anything on that IEP that you don't have data to support, and make sure that you can track and progress monitor. And certainly that would go for transition as well. We're supposed to be looking at transition through the lens of what can we do for that student while we have him in our midst to get him ready to leave us and be successful and be able to make that transition, get that job, go to that training program or whatever, or go to that supported employment or participate in community events or whatever it might be that's going to make them successful at whatever level of cognition they are, or whatever level of work they're going to decide to do, and how and the like. So I think that's really, really important that we understand the foundation. And then something else I want to throw in there too is, you guys are new teachers or emerging teachers, most of you. And so I want to say, as a professional educator, as a person, we need to bring our best game always. And that guidance document is our tool. It's our Bible, like Brenda said. It's our go-to for how to do these things. Now, sometimes we do a good job of bringing that to life for you in a training. Sometimes maybe we leave a little bit desired. But the thing is, the language. We have to understand the language in there. And, there's so many tools on this little computer that we work on all day long. There's so many tools on there that if you have a word like verbal comprehension measure from WISC, or if you have working memory and you don't know what that is, I would challenge you and charge you to go into your tools and look and see what you can find out, because we need to know the disability of the student. We need to know the impact of the IQ, and we need to know what programs to plan for them. And so the IEP goes a long way, or the IEP guidance document goes a long way. And like Brenda said, it has all those guiding questions that we're going to help you. So if you can't think of what to put in that section, you come up on something, maybe you don't quite understand what they're talking about, then you would Google that. You would put that in Chat GPT, or you would use whatever type of search engine and come up with some study on your own, because in order to do this job well, you've got to know that vernacular. You got to know those words and that language that we discuss so much. So right here we have a bit of a screenshot, and you can see the guidance documents on the right, and it's talking about the IEP. It says it's a written program for a student with a disability, and the IEP describes the student's strengths and needs and articulates measurable annual goals. And it also has related services. So those related services are things like speech and OT and PT. Might be that the student needs special transportation, or those types of things. So you would have to document that under related services. And then the IEP also describes what specially designed instruction is and what supplementary aids and services are. And so we need to know the difference between those. There's a good document, we call it the schoolhouse document, that does a good job of explaining that. And we also have some books and things, and we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end, about what specially designed instruction is. But just as a way of introducing from the guidance document, you see the kinds of things that are in the guidance document. The student's ARC is responsible, or the student's ARC team is responsible for developing the IEP. There's no predetermination of things in special education. We have to come together as a team. Now, it's okay to bring a draft. And I would suggest, based on what we've learned in all of our legal presentations that we've listened to in the last 2 or 3 years, is do not fail to say that if you bring a draft to that meeting, that this is a draft, and that you will get parent involvement, and you will get regular ed teacher involvement, and you'll get chairperson involvement in the development, because it's supposed to be a team effort. So the ARC develops the IEP, and then it ensures that the IEP is being implemented. And if you have problems on the IEP, if you write goals that are too hard or too easy, or you have behavior issues with a student, or you have things that are not working, you're supposed to come back to the table. So looking at a caseload from top to bottom and say, I've got 15 folders and I'm going to have 15 meetings this year for annual review, is the wrong approach, right? So if we have progress that's data that's telling us we need to tweak something, we better do that. If we have a student that is acting up behaviorally, and we have not addressed that through the IEPs, all students with disabilities, and really all students, have the right to have child find applied to them, and to address those outstanding behaviors that are impeding learning of themselves or others with positive behavior intervention supports. I want to make sure we understand that just because you have 15 IEPs doesn't mean you're just going to have 15 meetings this year. And if you're doing it the correct way, you should be addressing those little blips on the screen when those behaviors occur. And then, the other things the ARC does is they review progress toward the annual goals at least once, it says, every 12 months, and revises the IEP as appropriate. And then we're also getting together with that parent. We're trying to get that parent involved. And we're trying to ask parents, what do you think your student needs to be working on? And capturing that in conference summary, capturing that on the IEP, and capturing it as part of the total picture for the student is super, super important. All right. So, Brenda, you want to talk about this little piece right here? Okay.
Sounds good to me.
All
okay.
Right.
So the first thing you see on an IEP is present levels. What we need to do with present levels, they tell us that there are 4 things that we need to put in that under each of the categories that we're going to be writing a goal for. Denny, Paul, and I actually feel like there's 5 things, okay? Because we feel like that we need to be comparing the students' progress monitoring to make sure that we're following the path for the student. We want to make sure that we do that. All right. So we know most of the time our kids are not commensurate with similar age peers, so we don't mark the box. But there are several boxes that we can mark, and depending on the disability, we can mark several boxes and the age level. So one thing we want to make sure of is that if they're commensurate with peers, you can go ahead and mark the box. Okay. But you can still put in information that you would like for others to know that's going to read the IEP, just for their benefit too. Some very important information. An example would be like for the health. If they have any type of allergies, we need to know that. So we put that in there in case something happens. If they're allergic to bees and get stung with a bee, they may have to have an EpiPen. We have all these peanut allergies, all these different types of allergies that we have. So we need to document those things so other people will know that it's reading that document in the general education classrooms. So if they're not commensurate, we want to make sure that we are writing strengths. And when we're talking about the strengths, we're talking about relative strengths. So it's not compared to like another same age peer that is not special ed, or even if they are special ed, we're not comparing them. We're comparing them to themselves. And that's what we mean by relative. And then we also need the needs. What's the concerns? What do we have? What are the barriers? So we can try to get around those barriers. So we use what Denny Paul was talking about earlier, specially designed instruction, to try to get around those barriers, to find ways that we can just go right through that barrier, and the students will understand how to do that, not only in that particular class that we're doing that in, but throughout the day. We like for them to take it on to the rest of the classes. We also have to have that student performance and the baseline performance. And when we're looking at that performance, when we look at baseline, a lot of people just consider academics. Okay, that's good because we have to have that. But there's also another thing that Denny Paul had mentioned earlier, and it's about the functional needs of the child. So if there are functional needs, we need to also have goals for that as well, because those are the things that they really need to get through the grade levels, to understand. And a lot of times, like telling time, money, they need to know how to use money. They need to know how to pay for things. So we try to teach them things to do that. And then the last thing is like the adverse effect. And when we're talking about the adverse effect, we're talking about how their disability is affecting them in their educational performance. When we talk about how, we want to reason, okay? We want to reason there. Why? Is it because of a cognitive disability? Is it because they had some brain trauma or whatever? We need to know that so we can understand the child much better. Because remember, this IEP, once we go through it, we ought to be able to go in the classroom and sit down and figure out who that child is. And then, if they transfer to another district, then that district will have that IEP that has all that good information in there, and they won't have to stumble through things and try to do things over. So that's one thing that we like to look at. So on the other side, if you'll look on the right hand side there, it said box not checked there by the communication status. So if it's not checked, then you have to put those 5 pieces in there. And the other one that we were talking about, I want to make sure of is we compare last year's to this year. So we know about the rate of progress. If they were reading maybe words, maybe 50 words per minute, and at their level, they should be reading 115, then we know there is a significant difference in there. So we want to try to close that gap as much as we can. So we make sure if they don't have speech, that we mark that box. But just because we mark the box doesn't mean we can't put something in there, but we don't have to do those 5 pieces that we were talking about. So academic performance, most of the time we do have something written in there, unless, their academics ain't affected, and that's very few of the disabilities. But we just need to make sure that if we mark the box commensurate, that we're not going to write a goal for that. That's the big piece there. If you check the box, you won't be writing a goal for it. And if you don't check the box, then we have to make sure that we put those pieces in there.
And Brenda, one of the things that I like to tell folks, especially, is that stranger test is really, really important.
Yes.
So I would urge you and challenge you again to, when you write your present level, read that present level again and ask yourself these questions. Can I tell where the student is functioning in the areas of disability that got them into special education? So I use this phrase. It's an old adage, I guess. You dance with the one that brought you. So you first have to think about what the impact of the disability is. So we need to know the impact of the general intelligence piece, the WISC scores, the IQ scores. We need to know, if the student's OHI, is there some documentation concerning, inattentiveness, the lack of strength and alertness, those types of things. And one of the things that I think districts sometimes fall into as well, Brenda, is they get away from really focusing on that eligibility form. And that eligibility form is so important. We were looking at eligibility this morning. So important to look at that eligibility and to discern, what the adverse effect of the disability is, and then really treat that. And so when you're reading back through that, can I say I can see the adverse effect? I know how the disabilities impacting the student's progress in these areas that we talked about that are foundational to the IEP: academics, your transition piece, your functional piece, and your behavioral piece. Again, going back to what Teresa told us, don't put anything in there that you don't have support for. And so we need to document that and understand that when we raise a need or concern, we have to address it either with a service or a supplementary aid and service. And so, either specially designed instruction or supplementary aids and services are going to do that for us. And so when we read back through that, can we tell where that student's functioning? If there's reading difficulties, do we know what the independent reading level is, what grade level it is? Do we know what the instructional level is, what the zone of proximal development is, and where we're going to actually be working with that kid, and where that productive struggle comes in to see that progress? And so it's very, very important that we don't just write things in those boxes to be writing, but that they really have a purpose and they really determine what the current level of functioning is. That's the purpose of the present level, is to let us know what the student's strengths are. And when you profile a student, when you start looking at how do they best learn, what's their learning style, what do they have interest in, what are their preferences? There's a lot of research that supports providing students with activities that not only provide success, but also interest in order to motivate them to learn. And so, engagement is a big piece of this. So there's a lot that goes into this. And it's not just how quickly can I get it finished and get it off my plate. Does it really mean something? And can I really progress monitor it? If you don't have progress monitoring data and someone calls your hand on it, you're going to be in for a tussle in the legal realm, and then also with the State Department people who audit these things. You're going to be, you're not going to be able to provide them with what what they need. Plus, we don't have any evidence to say that we've implemented. And remember, it said the ARC, the members of the team, and you're one of those members, ensures the implementation. And that's how we do it, by making sure we got a solid foundation in that present level so that then we can write goals. So I just threw another screenshot up here. And it really just goes and shows you what the areas are: communication, academic performance, and the like, general intelligence. So you can't gloss over the general intelligence piece if a student has an MMD or FMD designation. You can't gloss over the general intelligence piece, in my mind, in any of those areas, because that really speaks to the disability in many ways. Always, those 5 areas on the WISC are going to tell you a lot about what's going on with that student and how they learn. And so the present level statements serve as the foundation for the development of the IEP. And we need to know what the student currently knows and can do in the following areas. That's what it says. That I'm not making this up. That's what it says in the IEP guidance document. So we need to know what the student can do. And then we need to develop a baseline around the strengths and needs of the student. And in particular, the concerns, you need to have an associated percentage or some numbers in your present level. So Brenda can talk to you a little bit, if she will, about what we look for when we're doing folder review in that regard.
Okay, so as we're doing folder reviews, we actually scan and we look for numbers. We look for percentages. That gives us like the baseline. We know where the student, you may talk about where the student was and now where the student is at from last year to this year. So we do like for you to compare that. And I've said that 2 or 3 times. So I think that's important for us to do. So the present levels, they lead us through the whole entire document. And we know that when we're going into writing those goals, that we're going to have percentages, numbers, and that as well. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we put those percentages or numbers in those present levels. We need to know those types of things. A lot of people, they'll put words like struggling, they're struggling, they're having difficulties. Well, okay, that's fine, but what's the percentage on that? Did you all do some progress monitoring on that? If you did, we need to know those percentages or those numbers. So we skim and scan, and we just try to make sure that we see those numbers in there, because that is exactly what KDE does as well, to make sure that you're putting the numbers in there to actually show that the child has either progressed or they're regressing. So we don't want them to do that. So that's one way we can tell, is to see those numbers.
Okay, and if you notice down there, I have a little block around some information, and it says there should be a direct relationship between the information in this section and the measurable annual goals, any short-term objectives or benchmarks, the accommodations developed and recorded in the rest of the IEP. Copying the integrated report into the present levels does not provide the ARC with all the information that's necessary to accurately support the development of annual goals. Baseline has to be established with fidelity. We have to know where that baseline is. If we're talking about reading, that's a vast area, okay? Let's say a MAP score or a Wyatt score gives us an area the student is deficient in reading comprehension. It's not enough just to say the student is deficient in reading comprehension, although we may say that, but we need to drill down to exactly what one of those 5 areas is making the biggest impact. Is it phonemic awareness? Is it the use of phonics? Is it fluency? What are those things that are impacting that comprehension, causing that real problem? And so we say, we have this question come up all the time. Well, I don't have any baseline data. Well, where do we get that from? Okay, so with an initial IEP, you would look to your RTI data, and your RTI data in reading should be well established now in your districts. It should be well established in math. It should be well established in behavior. And so if a student's has an IEP, they should have been through all those tiers. And then we should be able to look at the tier 3 information and bring over a baseline, right? In a particular discrete skill area. It can't just be a big area. You can't just say he's got problems in reading. We have to hone down to reading comprehension or one of the 5 areas. And then, if we're doing sections, and we'll see this in a little bit later in the presentation, but if we're doing other sections, we got to have data to support that. And then for subsequent IEPs, once we get that thing rolling, we do some progress monitoring at the end, and we see where that kid ends up on that particular goal at the end of that cycle. And we may look at the last 4 to 6 data points that we take, and we take an average of those last 4 to 6 data points, and we bring that goal forward. And we'll tweak that goal a little bit. We won't change the intent of the goal. It might be still reading and answering questions, but it might be on a different level. So his instructional level hopefully has increased, but maybe not to the point that we need to get rid of the goal, or they need to write a new goal. It just depends on what we're doing. But so there's 2 types of data that produce baseline. The RTI data would produce that initial baseline, and then your progress monitoring from the previous goals would produce the probe information and the baseline from that. And so if you get a folder and you look in there and say, I don't see any baseline, well, then you've got some work to do with your student, and you need to pull them in, and you need to do some probing, and you need to determine what a baseline is and get that ready for the next meeting. If the folder's been handed to you from another person, and maybe that person left a little bit of desired in terms of developing a progress monitoring or keeping up with the progress monitoring, we've got to get baseline established so that we can write a goal from that baseline, so that we can show that we can measure the improvement and the rate of learning of that student. So anyway, I know I'll go crazy on that stuff because it is so vitally important. Let's move on. Okay, so when we write present levels, we use the Kentucky Academic Standards. We use, and we also can determine academic baseline and functional baseline. This is a screen grab from, our screen capture from one of the pages there in the IEP guidance document. And it says, using the KAS or the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards or the Kentucky Academic Standards for alternate assessment, identify the grade or age level standards applicable to the student. For example, if the student's in the 5th grade, use the 5th grade KAS. Now, if you can't write goals on the 5th grade, if the kid's in the 5th grade and they have an IEP there, he wouldn't need an IEP goal, right? He's going to be functioning somewhere less than that. But you look at the types of information that they need to strive for, and you look at the prerequisite skills, and you find out what's making that problem for that kid and why they can't achieve and meet those goals in those standards. And so you let the standards kind of guide you, because those are the kinds of things you need to be working on. But those prerequisite skills would be the skills that we would be working on. And we would be, number one, providing work on the skill deficiency, and we were providing specially designed instruction. But then we would also weave in some accommodation and provide them with maybe a passage on the 5th grade level that's read to them so that they could have access. So it's a twofold charge. And the same thing with your functional baseline. We're looking at where does that, we're looking at the adaptive behavior. How does the kid do in daily living? How does the kid do with communication? How does the student do with socialization? And if they're not socially competent, or if they can't communicate, then we got some work to do there as well. And let me reemphasize, for students that have intellectual disabilities, those MMD and FMD students, we cannot gloss over this. We have to really make this apart, because these kinds of issues can keep a student from being educated. And so it's an access piece as well. And so we need to think about that. It says, for using the present levels of the student, identify the student's current baseline performance, and then determine the student's current functional performance. So, you know, those are very, very key pieces. When we look at step 3, this is straight out of the guidance document. It says, if a student is commensurate, that doesn't mean they're on grade level. It means a similar range or age range, that they're performing similar to an age range or grade range. It's not a grade level. So you can include information that you need to, if you do check the box and say the student's commensurate, you can still add some information that might be needed. Like I can't do anything without these eyeglasses, right? And so if I had an IEP, the teachers would need to know that DP can't see the stuff unless he's got his eyeglasses on. Or if a student's taking medicine, those types of things can be added into your present levels where you're checking the box. You're not going to write a goal. You're not going to do a service. These things mitigate those problems, your eyeglasses, your medicine and things of that nature, but they still need to be included in the full picture of the student. And so that's something that we really need to think about. And we've kind of hit this. When the student's not commensurate, you have to have these 5 areas. So when we were reviewing folders, we're looking for evidence. Did they address adverse effect? Did they talk about relative strengths? Did they identify how the student best learns? Did they profile the student and find out all they needed to know about the student in this particular area? And, you know, it's okay to write superlative type strengths in there sometimes, but you're really, when we're focusing on an academic area, you need to write about academics and strength, what the strengths are in academics. And those students, if you'll look into those academic pieces, there's going to be 1 or 2 things they do a little bit better than others. And so that's what we're talking about. And that's how you would accentuate, like if a kid's really good with verbal comprehension, then you would give him a lot of work in that regard. And so you got to have these pieces. And again, there's the initial IEP, what you would have for that, and then what you would have for annual review. We've already kind of covered that. So we've talked through these slides already. So you can see results of intervention, classroom data, and assessments would help you to determine what the baseline is for a student with an initial IEP. And then all this other stuff on the right is when you do an annual review, you're looking at that filtering process. You're making sure that there's been analysis of progress monitoring data, and you develop that baseline so that you can write an appropriate goal. I think we've adequately covered this slide, so I'm going to move on. This is just some examples of on the left of your screen. Lois struggles with comprehension of grade level text. Well, that's a little bit of a vague statement. So over here on the right, you can see how we would correct that. We're just going to go ahead and jump to the chase here. If we had a lot of time, we might let you do this, but Lois answers comprehension questions on a 3rd grade reading level with 80% over 3 out of 5 trials. So you see how that quantitative analysis tells us that she is currently functioning right here, 3rd grade, 80%. She answers comprehension questions. So when we do that, the guidance document also talks about INDRU. Okay, it's got a reference and a hot link to the INDRU case. And so we know that if a kid is currently at about 90% on 3rd grade, consistently, they can 90% of the time answer 90% of the questions on 3rd grade, we probably need to look at probing them on the 4th grade or maybe even the 5th grade, and depending on what their disability. And so we want to provide ambition, and we want to provide right goals that have some ambition to them and that are unique to the student. So we got to know where the kid is particularly functioning so that we can move them up a little bit and we can provide progress over amount of time. And when you write a goal, it's for 365 days. So it should be broad enough that it's going to provide enough based on our review and our analysis as a student and their disability, it's provide them with enough opportunity to progress based on their rate of learning and their disability. So Stephen can follow two-step directions 75% of the time when given visual cues. That's pretty specific, we say. So you can see that when you see the data pop up there, the 90%, that's what we're talking about. We want to see those types of things written into the present levels. These are examples of statements that are bad if that's what we find, because we're going to say, you know what, there's no data, there's no baseline, there's nothing to base the goal on. But you get the idea that when Brenda and I review, we want to see those percentages in your statements, and we want to make sure that we can currently say this is exactly where this child's functioning when the IEP cycle starts. So here's just a section that says, here's how do needs impact progress, involvement in the curriculum, and the progress needs to be, and how does the disability impact? Okay, grade level knowledge, reasoning, achieve proficiency, barriers to college and career transition. So this is what we're talking about when we're thinking about all of these areas. That's why we can't undo or leave these things out, because we have to make sure that we got enough information in the IEP to adequately address the student's needs. So it's so very important. And what supports are needed to participate in grade or age appropriate activities? We need to be able to determine what's going to help them and what we can do for them. So that's why the IEP is so important. We've hit this pretty hard, but you can see this is the beginning section of the academic performance piece. And this screen grab's taken right out of the IEP guidance document, and it talks about academic performance. And it says, really key here, describe the level of development and how the student applies learning. Okay, establish the baseline, document the student's strengths, most recent evaluation, progress monitoring from interventions or current IEP, and the parent input. So that's so important. Our new record review document hammers parent input. And so you got to talk about that in your conference summary, and you got to talk about that in your IEP. Brenda, you have anything to add to this particular slide?
Yes. Sometimes parents, they don't come to the meetings, but I would call them, or if they had, sometimes they don't have a telephone, or send a note home from the student and just say, you know, do you have some concerns? Are they something you would like to see us teach? And try to just keep asking those questions until they can answer some of those questions, so you can fill out the part about what the parent, you know, feels, and that they are participating in the writing of that IEP.
Excellent. So here's another one. This gets into the guided questions, and I use reading here, and you can see, you know, as you move through the guided questions on the IEP guidance document, it really comes right out of those standards. These are the skills, the foundational skills for phonics and word recognition, the foundational skills for phonological awareness, fluency, vocabulary acquisition. I'm telling you, if you're not working with students, if you got students with an IEP and you're not working with vocabulary and the embedded vocabulary, you're doing them an injustice. So we really need to be thinking about that. But you can see that if you just pick one out, if you say, okay, we're going to focus on phonics with this student because we realize that they have a difficulty making words by writing letters for phonemes. They're not getting the phonological, the sound letter association. There's a breakdown there somewhere. And I'm not a reading specialist, don't even profess to be, but I know that this can help you understand what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about reading difficulty. And these are the types of things that you would focus on: applying phonics and word analysis skills to decode unfamiliar words, using context clues, those types of things. And all of these foundational pieces, all these four, will eventually then lead to comprehension. And comprehension is the one that we left off in the screen grab, but that's what we're talking about. So if a student's got comprehension issues, we might need to look back to one of these foundational pieces in these other areas to see what's really causing the comprehension problem. Then you got a screen grab from general intelligence. And I put some guided questions up there. The one I wanted to focus on with you guys was attention and memory. I think it's so important for you to look at your files and to look at those WISC scores and look at the impact of working memory, because it can really move the bar for you. It's one of those things that can really help students unlock some real areas of growth. And so what we need to be focusing on improving all students' memory. And so you can see right there how well does, and this is a preschool kid, how well do they attend to and copy from a model? And then as you move on up, how do they follow single or multi-step directions? Can they recall information or hold information in working memory long enough to apply it to a math problem, or to a problem, or figuring out what a sentence means or a paragraph means, or what's being inferenced? Can they create visual pictures in their mind in order to and hold those in order to figure out what's going to come next or what's going to happen next in the story? So I think it's very important that we focus in on, when we're looking at general intelligence, we really don't leave the other areas out. You got to know those 5 areas on that WISC. But I really think the attention memory piece is one that, the use of mnemonics, graphic organizers, and teaching students to be able to use those things so that they can more effectively house their information so that they can move to higher order thinking. And I think that's very important. So then we have the piece social emotional. We can see here guided questions for the areas. Now, when we're talking about social emotional functioning, we're developing that baseline for it, these are some things you can ask yourself. Most of our students that are in special education have executive functioning issues. Okay, they have a hard time managing themselves, setting goals, starting tasks, sticking to tasks, working within approximate amount of time, those types of things. So, we really see how the guidance document can be really beneficial to us. Now, if you're doing the present level for social emotional, most of the time the information, the data is going to come from the Vineland. Okay, how's the student doing with socialization? How are they doing with functional communication? How are they getting along with their peers? And so we look at the higher scores in the areas, and those turn into relative strengths for us in our data. And then we look at the lower scores from the Vineland, and those can turn into potential goals. And I can say to you that if you can't check the box in this particular area, remember the IEP's purpose is function. We need to be writing goals for these students that have intellectual disabilities. When those scores are 77.5 or below, or 78 or below, we need to be really looking at turning those into potential goals. And then, of course, the health, vision, hearing, and motor piece is where we see a lot of other health impairment come about. Now, these particular areas also have, you have your health areas, and that's where ADHD falls under. Okay, that's how OHI comes about. But then we also have some special factors under vision and hearing that we also have to adhere to. And so you see, and then the motor issues, and how you're asking yourself, how do these things impact the overall development of the child? But in most cases, when we are looking at the health, vision, hearing, and motor, the HVHM present level, and the student has ADHD, we need to have data come from a Connors rating scale or a BASC. We need to have some data that speaks to their inattentiveness, their lack of muscle control, whatever it might be that's keeping them, not lack of muscle, but their vitality. and their ability to attend to task and the impact it's having. So the Connors rating scale is one where we would need to really, really focus our attention and make sure that we have data there. And remember, dance with the one that brought you. So if you've got an OHI kid and they're ADHD, this is the key piece right here. This is the first thing that we have to address. Now, they may have other academic areas, and you can address those as well, as long as they're in a range that is significantly below the same age peer, significantly and consistently below. But this is the piece that you have to have. And so lots of times we'll say, we'll review files and we'll say, where's the data in this area? We only have a doctor's statement saying they have ADHD. And we just go to town and we forget about the ADHD and we address reading and math and writing, maybe behavior in some ways, but we have to address those behaviors. There needs to be goals in regard to that. So student performance data should not be copied and pasted from the previous IEP. The data must be obtained during the annual IEP cycle. So be careful about, basing your last IEP on an old IEP or your new IEP on an old IEP. So very important. This is the special factors piece. We know that lots of times when students have ADHD or the EBD, we'll forget to check the box of behavior as a special factor. That's a no-no. We've got PBIS is a must.
For that special factor for behavior, it's strange that if a student has behavior issues like ADHD, and they mark that box no, but yet you go over and you find a goal for behavior, and there's nothing in the socio-emotional or even the health to say that they have some type of behavior issue, it's a big red flag. If they have intellectual disabilities, they have to have a behavior goal. We normally find that in their Vineland, their adaptive behavior test. And we look to see which area there's a concern in. And, we look and try to find which will help the student best. Which one of those behaviors do we need to work on? And that helps because we have to have structure. If you don't have structure, you can't teach. So we must have a behavior goal for those intellectual students. Right. And by far the EBD students. And those OHI that have those behaviors. So we need to make sure we're looking at that box and we mark it appropriately.
That is a big pitfall. And we just want to see present level consistency here. Mm-hmm. If you mention this or raise this and it needs to be addressed as a special factor, there needs to be consistency between the two areas. So we're always looking at the present level and how it impacts goals, how it impacts special factors. And so, the guidance document's pretty clear about the goals. Here's the pieces. Audience behavior, circumstance, degree, criteria, evaluation, method, measurement, and frequency of data collection. When Brenda and I look at files, we're looking for those pieces, but we're also looking to see, is that behavior measurable? Can you see it? Can you count it? Can you hear it? Can you time it? I say that all the time. And then we're also looking to see if the method of measurement we've chosen will, in fact, it should be embedded in the goal, because all these pieces have to be in there in order for it to be measurable. Will that method of measurement measure that behavior? All this information is in the IEP guidance document. You can see here how they've written this. And this is a visual capturing of, the circumstance comes first, and then the audience, and then the behavior, then the degree and the criteria, and then the frequency and the evaluation method of measurement. So you can see in the IEP guidance document, there is support for writing a goal with all the 6 components. One thing I can say is that on the right, these are the things that measurable annual goals are supposed to be. And on the left, it's probably more important to point out what they're not. They're not copied and pasted from the standards. They're not intended to be the entire curriculum for the student. Remember, when you're doing IEPs are layered on top of core instruction, layered on top of RTI and UDL and differentiated activities. So the student's supposed to get something special when you're doing that. We appreciate you being here today. It's certainly good to have each and every one of you. And if we can help you in any way, we'll be happy to do that. My name is Denny May. And on behalf of Brenda Combs, we'll be signing off here soon. Thank you, guys.